the more knowledge that the human animal is given.
Jesus. Really?
The more he is capable of carrying out his urge to dominate, control, and survive. He becomes the pinnacle of the food chain. Natural forces bending forces as mighty as the river and the atom to his will. He becomes a warrior and a king. Tyrant. Science is in the hands of organic motives. Forgive us. For we know not what we do. Science and the individual imagine how reclaiming the power of science for private use on the level of the individual. Calling it back home. The discipline of formulating internal maps and testing them can be applied within one's own life toward the goal of happiness and spiritual attainment. This is the Hermetic path. What we do with modern science pales in significance to what the original inventors of the scientific method intended for it. A discipline originally intended spiritual advancement of the individual has been betrayed and leaked into the culture. It has in fact been exploded upon the world, into the hands of mob, to the point where the fallen angels now run untamed throughout human progress. Even individual level, knowledge gained through science can be dangerous. It can build, and it can destroy. It can seem to erect for you a majestic tower, such that you stand out above your peers. But if your knowledge is not humbly tested and adjusted to reality, your tower will topple, as though it were built on a foundation of sand, like the sandy plain on which ancient Babylon was built. Knowledge gained on the Hermetic path is especially tricky. Elevating awareness into the spiritual realms means that you are working with things that cannot be experienced firsthand. In the practice of magic, you sometimes only know if you were successful in a ceremony weeks later, when the physical manifestation of your efforts begins to appear. As individuals, it is up to each one of us to reclaim our creative powers, to break the chain of suffering caused by inaccurate internal maps, and to redeem the fallen angels. To keep our innate biological tendencies from bullying our minds into the service of fear, we must redirect the mind to liberate itself from the demands of the body. If each of us cannot do this for himself as an individual, then the awesome power of science will continue to remain the captive of the part of human nature that troubles us the most. The first step, then, in applying science toward liberation is to find a system of symbols that encompasses and explains human nature and how it dominates the unenlightened man. We must find a language system and a map that explains the human soul and its relationship to the universe. That way, the student can deal with the predicament of incarnate existence in a systematic way. There are many systems of classification that clarify the human condition in spiritual terms. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, for instance, uses Kabbalah as a language and the Kabbalistic Tree of Life as a map. The glyph of the tree charts the recesses of the body, mind, and spirit all the way to the source of existence. Placking symbols on this diagram, the student can, through experiencing their interaction, delve beneath the level of biological imperatives and personally identify how his mind works by identifying how the symbols relate to each other. He discovers painfully how he creates suffering for himself. He applies symbols in various symbolic techniques, such as ritual, to restructure his interior map such that it produces joy and fulfillment. Additionally, he tests his changing interior world by living and working in the external world. The monastery or cave is no place for a Hermeticist, and Kabbalists in particular have almost always advocated actively engaging in one's life. Gradually, through trial and error, the student unmakes the automatic complexes that hold prisoner his magical power. L yearns for a creative way to better understand the human ability to perceive via symbols is to recognize this faculty with a new label. Let us therefore call it Mercury. I will refer to both the Roman god Mercury and the astrological planet Mercury to redefine humanity's most important gift. These both correspond to the Sephirahad and the grade of Practicus. Mercury is first of all the quick and agile god who represents the power of the intellect. Mercury governs the faculties of the mind, mediation, communication, transmission, and translation. Specifically, these include mental and nervous processes, speech and writing, dexterity, ambivalence, and the distribution of energies. Mercury, the Liquid Intelligence 187-188 Chapter 7 is superficial. It is the electrical activity of the brain that is capable of knowing about things externally. It shapes itself to whatever subject or stimulus is presented before it, creating therefrom all kinds of corresponding conclusions and belief systems in the blink of an eye. Astrologically, the planet Mercury's chameleon quality makes it take on whatever zodiac sign it is in and enhance it with intelligence. If it is close to another planet in a chart, it will adopt that planet's function and add a sharpness to it as well. Mercury represents the mutable aspects of humankind's nature. It is the intelligence that is book-learned, as opposed to that of experience. It is the brain consciousness that covers its subject, but it does not really penetrate it or become one with it. By its very nature of superficiality and its ability to drape itself over the shape of the world, our Mercury nature is the very faculty that lies to us about reality. Because it so readily assumes the shape of our experiences, creating dysfunctional maps of reality based on them, it is the very thing that keeps us separate from, and at odds with, the universe. Our experiences prod our mercurial intelligence to fashion beliefs, complexes, fears, and patterns of behavior that keep us locked up in the fantasy world of the ego. It is interesting to note that the Sephirah tree of life that corresponds to Mercury is Had, whose virtue is truth and whose vice is falsehood. Our maps of reality may be truthful and serve us well, or they may be deceitful and lead us time and again into suffering. We have before us the perennial choice between good and evil. Not good and evil in the moral sense, but good and evil sense. We can choose to be truthful, consciously disciplining the mind to convey an accurate representation of reality, or we can allow random events to create an inaccurate representation that steers us into error. The Roman god Mercury, or Hermes as he was known by the Greeks, is regarded as the psychopompus, the sole conductor who guides the deceased to his just rewards in the afterlife. He is the messenger of the gods, the instructor and guide to the hermetic mysteries. He is thought of as an initiator into occult schools, especially ritualistic ones involving full ceremony. This is another example of how our mercurial quality, when ritually trained, becomes not an imprisoning pattern but a guide by which we travel into more liberated states of consciousness. It is doubtful that the mind's mercurial activity can ever be fully silenced. Some advocates of meditation insist that this is both necessary and possible. But why kill the mind when you can harness and ride upon it instead? The power of language. Hermes Trismegistus is the central figure behind the Hermetic tradition. He is thought to have existed in ancient times as an Egyptian prophet. A mythical magus identified with both the Egyptian Thoth and the Roman Mercury, he is celebrated as the inventor of language and writing. Language is the biggest and foremost outgrowth of the Hermetic faculties. Some say that human beings have a natural instinct to form language, that it is a biological, evolutionary development. Humans do not have to learn how to use it as much as simply learn one particular language. The ability to think grammatically, subject, verb, and object is already built into the human brain. What would humans be like without language? It is impossible to say, since a description would involve words and grammar. Language has the power to shape our internal reality map in a way that divides it into different interrelating regions. Such fixed regions, or concepts, help us to organize knowledge, to arrange it in meaningful ways that suggest new possibilities and new plans of action. We all develop, knowingly or unknowingly, conceptual frameworks that help us understand and act upon the world. If it works in your inner maps, perhaps it will work in your outer life. Or perhaps not. Language is a hermetic skill very much misused by the unenlightened mind. We tend to actually believe words as if they were the very objects to which they refer. The mind is so mutable that, when it is left unchecked, it will jump to rash conclusions based on labels. For example, which of the following statements is most accurate? 1. I saw Jane at the grocery store last week. She grabbed a candy bar and walked out without paying. 2. Jane stole a candy bar last week. 3. Jane is a thief. The event involving Jane that led me to make the above statements may have been completely innocent, but the many crime dramas I have watched on TV have perhaps led me to make a judgment that endangers my relationship with Jane. If I had been aware of my mind's tendency to draw conclusions, I could have prevented it from hurting my own future, not to mention Jane's. Judge not, lest I be the liquid intelligence. 189-190 Chapter 7 Judged is a statement that is actually advice on how to work magic. Your present thoughts determine your future reality. Be careful. Statement number 1 above is obviously the longest, and it contains the most details. It is also the most accurate description of the experience. Statement 3 is the shortest, easiest, and harshest. This brings us to a paradox. When we take the easy route and create simplified, cut and dried maps of reality, our lives become more complicated. If, however, we allow the world to be complicated, life becomes simpler. If I refuse to draw conclusions and let reality remain uncertain, then I remain humble in regard to Jane. I don't really know who or what Jane is, no matter how many candy bars she walks out with, so therefore, my heart is open to her, and she can still be a human being full of surprises. But that doesn't mean that it is wrong for me to draw conclusions. Jane may very well be in the habit of taking things without paying for them. Labeling her thief may help me to protect myself from her in the future. The act of jumping to conclusions isn't bad. All that the Hermetic discipline requires is that I am aware that I am making a judgment when I do so. Though I may choose to protect myself from Jane by mentally stating that Jane is a thief, I must always be aware that my conclusion has no intrinsic reality. Jane and thief may have become linked in my mind, but I must accept that creating such a link will lead to a certain result. If I desire that result, and I am willing to accept the consequences, then I will continue to harbor that link. That is the process of magic, pure and simple, opening and closing links between different correspondences to produce desired results. It sounds moronically simple, but to be aware of links that constantly form and reform in our minds is not easy. Doing exercises that increase consciousness make it easier over time. The particular system that you use for such exercises in spiritual development is not important. It is only required that you use it effectively. Whether you envision a God, Christ, Devil universe or a Nirvana, Buddha, Samsara universe, the test of your mettle is not in whether you believe in your gods. It is in your ability to link those correspondences together into a functional whole. The properly harnessed and trained mercurial mind creates linkages that unbolt the gates of perception, opening it to the higher worlds within. On the Hermetic path to enlightenment, the aspirant develops a skill that the famous linguist S.I. Hayakawa calls extensional orientation. Extensional orientation is the state of mind that is prone to use words that refer to the environment without any interpretations or judgments about it. It maintains language reflecting the environment, rather than language imposing meanings on things, and is to link with those meanings, as if they were the things themselves. 3. There are no such things in the world as good and bad, eggs or Jews. There are no such things as God, angels, and demons. There are not even such things as human beings and love. There is just what is in the labels we use to navigate. And, of course, that which actually is cannot be directly conveyed by speech or symbol or label. It is futile arrogance to assume that you can capture reality with words. Specifically, the verb is one of the most dangerous words in our language. If you use it habitually, you may be in danger of believing in your own misevaluations. Can Jane really be a thief in external reality? The Hermeticist acknowledges that this can only exist in the mind. He is a tricky demon, because even as you try to catch yourself using it, it changes its form so many times that it can easily slip by your scrutiny and link concepts together without your consent. My answer was will be, has been, have been, had been, will have been. You have probably already begun to become aware of its power from the exercises in the previous grades. Simply avoiding the use of this verb for a while can open the mind immeasurably. On the Hermetic path, therefore, the student exerts deliberate effort to become aware of the power of language and symbol. The activity of the mind is directed to undo its own prison. It examines itself and modifies its ability to perceive, liberating itself from itself. It becomes free of its own labels and boundaries so that that which is beyond labels and boundaries can become the new locus of control. The ego learns eventually to relinquish its own labels, I and me, and settles down to just be what it is, an aggregate of biological and psychological traits centered, as it were, around the influence of that which is beyond labels. The mind finally matures and becomes humble. The mature mind knows that words can never say everything about anything, and such a mind is therefore adjusted to uncertainty. Whatever challenges the world thrusts upon it, it is at least free from the challenges of its own making. The Liquid Intelligence 191-192, Chap 1, 7. The beginnings of the Hermetic tradition. The Hermetic tradition has its origins in the Hellenistic world, in the Eastern Mediterranean cultures that flourished around the beginning of the current era, AD 1. Alexander the Great had driven the Persians out of Egypt in 332 BC, and in gratitude, the Egyptians worshipped him as a god-king. Like the pharaohs of 01D.4, the conquests of Alexander had produced a blending of many cultures: Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, and Persian. These cultures found a focal point in Egypt's new capital city, Alexandria. Greek philosophers found a new home in a foreign land, where they were exposed to the Egyptian religion. Hermeticism eventually gestated and grew in this tumultuous mix of cultures, and so did Christianity. Alexandria was a place of awesome beauty and wealth, attracting the greatest scholars of the civilized world. Of particular importance was its legendary library, which became the standard by which all libraries of the world at that time were measured. 5. Some 40 librarians, and contained over 700,000 scrolls, 6 representing the mystical, magical, and scientific lore of all the nations that came together in the city. Within its walls, differences between men became a unity and diversity, a precursor of the greatness that mankind could realize under the nurturance of the new fusion between Greek philosophy and Egyptian magic. Alexandria was also a dangerous place. A city that becomes a hotbed of cultural exchange and spiritual transformation naturally stirs up the insecurities of its inhabitants, especially those inhabitants who are not yet ready for such change. One culture by itself is, after all, a singular systematic way of surviving. If your culture is different from mine, I may, out of ignorance, conclude that your way of life is a threat to my very survival. Cultural and racial tensions in Alexandria were therefore strong. Violent crime was rampant. Politicians played terrible power games. It was very much like the New York of the ancient world. Consider a dark and powerful city like New York. Despite its reputation as a crime-ridden metropolis of cold-blooded contenders for wealth, it is simultaneously a seething womb of artistry and cultural exploration. One can meet a Broadway musician, a politician, an entrepreneur, and a mugger all on the same day. Any place that becomes a melting pot for free thinkers also stirs up the enemies of that process. The Greeks were particularly enamored with the powers of the mind. Many of the subjects they studied were so abstract that they appeared to have no practical use, but nonetheless Greek philosophies would set the Western world on fire more than 1,000 years later, when they were rediscovered in the Renaissance. Alexander the Great had died before he could take possession of his capital city, but King Ptolemy, who ruled after him, founded there the first scientific institution in the world to be funded by the government. 7. He called it the Place of Muses, or the Museum 8, Mousion in Greek. It remained as the primary center of Greek learning for 1,000 years. 9. Ptolemy believed that the Greek people's love of knowledge is what made Alexander so powerful a conqueror in Greek, the #1 language of trade throughout the Mediterranean. 10. He therefore made the museum as opulent and as attractive to great thinkers as he could. Its private studios, surrounding tropical gardens, sparkling fountains, and elegant statues played host to some of the greatest minds to have shaped the Western world. The subjects studied at the museum, however, mostly inclined in the direction of the secular, the practical, or the dry, the intellectual, mathematics, geometry, rhetoric, law, biology, physics, astrology, and zoology, to name a few. But the most important attraction of Alexandria existed not in its library or museum. No study was complete without a secret initiation into one of the mystery religions that existed in the various other schools throughout the city. In the 3rd century, the influence of Middle Eastern spirituality became particularly strong, challenging the super-rationalism of the Greeks. The practices of the Egyptian priests, Persian magi, Kabbalistic Merkaba mystics were designed to produce an ecstasy of the spirit instead of intellectual mastery of the material world. This naturally appealed to the Greek scholar weary from a bone-dry life of study. The fusion of the ecstatic and the rational that occurred through the initiations of Greek philosophers unexpectedly produced a secret caste of individuals. A new spirituality awoke from the cultural blend as though by accident. Initiates of it moved among the ordinary inhabitants of Alexandria. They reflected quietly in the gardens of the royal park that surrounded the great academy of learning. They recognized each other by secret handshakes in the markets and public baths, and they mingled with the Egyptian priests of the indigenous population. They were the philosopher-magicians, making up the mysterious invisible brotherhood of Hermes, also known as the Hermetists. It was not political intrigue that motivated these scholars to meet and keep silent about their studies. It was not an advocacy of one culture over another, but rather the advocacy of the liberation of the individual from the dominion of every culture. The Liquid Intelligence 193-194 Chapter 7, Spirit of Transformation that appeared in ancient Alexandria is not necessarily a cultural force. It is an evolutionary force that exists within every individual. Not a contrived ambition of the civilized ego, it is more the pressure from the divine spark within to grow beyond current limitations, upwelling of truth in a world of human deception. It was the silent voice of higher self that moved these learned men and women to meet privately, study quietly, and experiment in secret, and to bring the influence of that same truth more and more to bear on the physical world. The Egyptian religion was the catalyst that awakened Hermetism, which was the name for Hermeticism before the Renaissance. The Egyptians gave a colorful ritualistic expression to the intellectual philosophies of Greece and Rome. Brilliantly crafted Egyptian initiatory rituals helped many a Greek scholar get in touch with the power behind the images of the gods of his own culture. Powerful magicians were likewise born from thinkers of both convergent cultures. In incense-imbued temples, the art of ritual put the minds of its Greek candidates into the service of divine powers represented by gods like Thoth and Isis. Some of these initiates would go on to become the greatest prophets of the Western world. Thanks to the magical skill of the Egyptians, parallel threads of truth would eventually blend into a tapestry of philosophy, mysticism, and magic. The best way to understand how Hermetism formed is to examine the separate threads that harmonize in this union: philosophy, Egyptian magic, Persian mysticism, and Jewish Kabbalah. Greek philosophy. It is from the ancient Greeks that the Western world draws its primary strengths. The ideas of democracy and the importance of the individual come from them, and materialism and science do too. For our considerations on Hermeticism, I will mention 3 schools of Greek philosophy that are fundamental to its formation. The first is Stoicism, a largely pantheistic philosophy. The Stoics believe that the universe is God and that everything is divine. To their thinking, the logos, or controlling intellect of the universe, transforms itself into the material world in a natural fashion, not a spiritual one. The world's soul, of which all people are a part, is completely material and mundane. As a result, the Stoics' philosophy was naturally friendly to paganism, allowing for natural forces to be personified as gods of a somewhat natural order. Nothing was considered supernatural. In their moral lives, the Stoics pursued virtue for the happiness it secured them in the present life, not for any reward in the hereafter. Stoics were often quite skeptical and fatalistic, encouraging scientific experimentation and testing of theories of cause and effect. And of greater interest, they utilized systems of correspondences, believing that everything in the universe had either sympathetic or antipathetic relationships to everything else in a network of associations. This latter trait became a crucial element of Western magic. The next school of thought to consider is Platonism, based on the teachings of Plato, of course. Platonists regarded reality as dualistic, fractured between the world of the material senses and world of the divine. God existed outside of his creation in his own universal mind, peopled with perfect thought forms. Plato separated God from creation. God was seen as existing beyond the circling stars, and Earth was in a corrupted position in the center of the universe. All material forms were seen as distorted reflections of the original forms that exist eternally in the mind of God. The reflections are mortal or transitory, and the original forms eternal. Material things come and go because their corresponding divine forms pass over the field of matter and cast a sort of reflection in that matter, much as a passerby makes a brief reflection on the surface of a pond. The forms perceived in the world of the senses are, to Plato's mindset, imperfect reflections of perfect forces. Watching your loved ones grow, mature, and age is like watching the reflection of a passing phenomenon from another world. Think about it. Platonism comes the idea of theism, which defines divinity as separate from nature in an eternal, isolated, and uncreated state. And from this comes ideas of purity and holiness. The substance of the Creator is not, and cannot be, corrupted by the substance of his creation. The two universes, the eternal and the transitory, exist side by side, utterly different in nature, unable even to touch one another. God's singular reality exists independently of the reality of ideas held in mortal minds. And, similarly, this reality exists in perfect unity despite any multiplicity of gods that humans dream up to show forth its aspects. The development of theism would be very important to Jews. Most of them were traditionally opposed to paganism. Plato also put forth the idea of self, as the ancient Greeks called it. This silent voice as it speaks to the individual realm. Plato relates in his dialogues that Socrates, his teacher, had such a giving spirit looking over him. The Liquid Intelligence 195-196 Chapter 7. This idea of the separate, divine higher self establishes mankind in a unique position as independent of nature, world, but off it, as the saying goes. His life from a position divorced from nature. His body was only a reflection of his true self looking down from heaven. Philosophically and politically, this was a very dangerous development. If the religious zealot sees himself as a spiritual being having a material experience, celebrity of his own faith can easily influence him into acts of terror. Think of the terrorism that exists today, based on this dualistic belief of body and soul. If you are not your body, then you have nothing to lose, and you can strap bombs to your torso and walk into a foreign embassy to die for your divine cause. What should matter if our body is blown to bits or the bodies of others, for that matter if we are all just reflections on the pond of material existence? On the brighter side of his development, the idea of higher self sets the stage for a very important spiritual awakening process that today we call individuation. It is indeed possible, by use of philosophy, for a man or woman to awaken and loosen the bonds of familial, tribal, societal, and even human influences, to become truly a stand-alone entity capable of thinking and acting independently of those influences. No, negated by the roles handed to you by your family, society, or even your biology. Imagine your mother and father not as parents, but as friends. Imagine your lover as just another human being onto which you set your own ideals of beauty. Imagine the marketplace around you as a group of humans in their animal aspect, seeing their survival behavior. Such a perspective of the enlightened being is hard to envision, perhaps even disturbing. What does a human being strive for when he has transcended his humanity? Much of the Hermetic worldview that forms the basis of the magical system presented in this book is based on Plato. However, there is one important difference, and this brings us to the third school of thought, the Neoplatonists. The major philosopher behind Neoplatonism was Plotinus of Alexandria. He took the pantheistic universe of the Stoics and the theist duality of Plato and reconciled them. A Greek initiate of the mysteries of the Persian Magi, he eventually settled in Alexandria, where he wrote and taught his illuminated form of Platonism. According to Plotinus, God was both immanent within and transcendent to the universe. He was completely beyond the comprehension of the mind, and yet at the same time he was the essence of all that the mind beheld. In a vision of transcendence, Plotinus would have us see the reflection of the passerby in the pond, and the passerby himself as part of the same phenomenon, making up a unified whole without boundaries. His vision embraces the idea of Plato's higher self. The passerby is the higher self, and the reflection on the pond is one mortal incarnation of that self. The higher self, according to Plotinus, may make many passes by the pond, beholding its reflection each time as a separate lifetime. Reincarnation is not just an Eastern belief, but was held by the ancient Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, and some Christians as well. But Plotinus added a third component to the Platonist dualistic universe. It introduces the idea of a trinity, which would profoundly affect the development of Christianity after his time. The individuated mind and its lower animal aspect viewed as a unified whole can only be seen that way, according to Plotinus, from the viewpoint of a third perspective, that which encompasses them both. It is from this third vantage point of the one true level of reality that the divine can see and direct the other two relative points. He referred to this new unifying aspect as the one and the good. The fracture of the Platonic universe is healed by the Neoplatonic vision of transcendent unity. Picture a coin, one side of which you call heads and the other side of which you call tails. Let's say now that the coin represents you. For most people familiar with Plato's philosophy, heads represents your higher self and tails your animal soul. End of story. In Plato's dualistic universe, it is all too easy to fall into the trap of deifying one side of your nature over the other. In the West, we tend to cut away the mind from the body. We neglect our darker aspects, even as those aspects are a fundamental part of our nature, from which we cannot escape. But for Plotinus, heads represents ego, tails represents animal soul, and the substance of the coin itself represents the one, your higher self. This idea is like lightning to some and rather confusing to others. What does it mean to say that ego and lower self are united in a third, all-encompassing unity? Just one of the implications of this transcendental viewpoint is that the observer and all that he observes are part of the same thing, and within the unity of the two, a doorway can be opened through which the divine mind expresses itself in the substance of the world. Invisible unity can express itself amidst visible duality. This Neoplatonic idea of the Trinity would later easily be interpreted by Christians as the unfolding power of God. The Trinity of the One, the ego, and the lower the liquid intelligence 197-198 Chapter 7 self would become externalized in a religion for the masses, the rather bizarre trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Plotinus' philosophy uncovered the function of this trinity in humanity and even talked about it at length, insisting that it was attainable through philosophical study and speculation. Plotinus did not, however, advocate religious or magical ritual toward this end. That came later, from those who followed in his footsteps. Plotinus' difficult ideas, though they take a back seat to Plato's, continue to influence the world to the present day, and Neoplatonism has become known as the last great philosophical movement of the classical world. And Neoplatonism is the primary philosophy behind Antiquism. Kabbalah itself came about in its present state because of the mingling of the Neoplatonists and Jewish merkable mystics in the time of Alexandria. But Kabbalah did not become the Hellenicist's primary system of correspondences until much later in history, a subject for a later chapter. One of the future followers of Plotinus, Iamblichus, took the Neoplatonic ideals and combined them with the Chaldean oracles and Egyptian magic. The result was the orgy, pronounced the orgy. This new art, which acted as a synthesis of different traditions, is the foundation of Hermetic magic. Heavily steeped in the philosophical study of Plotinus, structured by the dignified gestures and props of Egyptian ritual, and drenched in the intoxicating verbiage of the Chaldean oracles, the disciples of Iamblichus compelled the divine world to influence the material world by means of what Iamblichus called unspeakable acts. For Iamblichus, philosophy by itself was not enough. It is not thought that links the theurgist with the gods, he writes. The theurgic union is attained only by the efficacy of unspeakable acts performed in the appropriate manner. This is very similar to the Tantric Buddhist notion of direct transmission of enlightenment via symbol. Supposedly, the Buddha once enlightened someone by holding up a flower at the appropriate moment. The appearance of theurgy was also the beginning of Western magic. The word theurgy appeared for the first time in the 2nd century AD in the attempts of Greek scholars to describe the effects that Egyptian sacred rites had on them. 1-2, equipped with their extensive philosophical knowledge, they easily found correlations between the Egyptian and Persian initiatory rites and the Neoplatonic views in their own culture. With great ingenuity that came about from years of immersion in abstract philosophy, they paired up the Greek gods with the gods in the Egyptian pantheon. Using their own well-known symbols as an overlay, they were able to discern that the silent voice that lay hidden within an Egyptian framework was the same silent voice that spoke from within their own tradition. Only now the addition of drama, ritual acts, and manipulation of symbols could aid them in inducing an intoxicated state of mind that, each time they entered it, would change them little by little into a being more than human. This transformation process is what we today call high magic. For it was the view of the Neoplatonist, and now of the Hermetist, that the soul was trapped in an illusion, that it was entangled in its identification with the world it surfaces. Through magical words, gestures, visualizations, and dramatizations, the inner nature of the self could be illuminated and set free. Egyptian priests, it is misleading to say that the Egyptians were religious. That word comes from the stilted, modern, rational view of spirituality. In the modern Western world, we live in a land of specialization and separation, but for the Egyptians, everything was part of the whole. They were never deceived into elevating the rational mind above nature. 1-3, everything was magical to them, and for the Egyptians, to have a separate religious institution within their culture was unthinkable. The temples were involved in every aspect of Egyptian life, and yet their culture still had a very strong intellectual thrust to it. The rational mind was viewed as part of nature, and therefore Egyptian science was practical, developed only for everyday uses. Little about it was abstract unless required to be so for measurement of architecture or the counting of bags of grain. 1-4, on the surface, the Egyptians seem pagan, but Egyptologists are well aware that the inhabitants of the Nile Valley believed in one single supreme deity that was considered to be beyond comprehension. The various gods of their mythology were aspects of the one. To them, the whole could only be comprehended through the parts. The Egyptians actually entertained many different versions of their mythology in their spiritual practice. Different accounts of how creation incarnated into being, for instance, were all regarded as valid, even though they contradicted each other in principle and in sequence of events. The Egyptians did not find it confusing to mix metaphors. They knew that the stories were not factually true but rather different accounts of the same unfolding divinity. Is. The Liquid Intelligence 199-200 Chapter 7. There are 3 components to Egyptian spirituality that can serve as a framework by which you can better understand their mythology as you study it. The first is that of a high god or solar logos, whose power one could experience as the life-giving sun. Ra and Horus are 2 leading examples of this power. The second is that of the regenerative powers of nature, symbolized by Isis and other female deities. 6. These 2 components come together meaningfully in one of Egypt's foremost creation myths, that of the sun priest, Heliopolis. In this story, The nun, or the primeval substance from which all is made, initially dominates the universe, filling every corner of existence. But as the universe opens a space within its midst so that the world can form, the nun recedes like the waters of the Nile after the flood. As the waters withdraw, a mound of earth is revealed. Onto this mound descends the light of sun, or the solar hype god, in the form of a hawk. I7. Here we have represented the first two coming together. The light meets the dark as the solar aspect of the divine meets the regenerative substances of nature, impressing its will upon them to create the universe. The meeting of these two powers sets the stage for the third component, that of the man-god. Is. The Egyptians recognized the potential for a human to become a realized god here on earth. The god Osiris, once a man, dies and is reborn in the form of Horus, the hawk-headed ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt. The human being, arisen from the regenerative powers of nature, inspired by the power of the solar logos, can die back to his natural state and realize his immortal self, becoming thereby a conscious ruler of his own destiny. The pharaoh was thought to be just such a being, descended from Osiris and Isis, who once walked the earth in human form as a king and queen. The pristine and pure lotus blossom that rises from the mud of the mound symbolizes the power of a human's divine potential. It dramatically, or should I say liturgically, expresses the light of the logos in matter by opening its petals. The pressure of life to grow upward from muddy obscurity into the clear light of manifestation is the power of Osiris, the man-god. It is the same force symbolized by Christ on the cross and the medieval rose. The standard Egyptian temple was a schematization of these three principles brought together under one roof. Every temple was enclosed by an outer wall of alternating concave and convex mud bricks, symbolizing the waters of Nun. Entering the grounds, one would find the hypostyle hall, which consisted of columns and a roof. This area was painted with designs of lush vegetation, the columns themselves bearing lotus blossoms as their capitals. The ceiling here represented the sky, and the painted columns the reed bank of the first mound of creation. The ground of this reception hall inclined gently from the exterior to the interior, indicating the slope of the mound itself. Next, one entered the sanctuary, which housed the shrine statue of the deity. 19. The anthropomorphic statue represented a particular human manifestation of the unknowable God that the initiate could develop within himself. The Egyptian temple therefore represented the creation of the universe, the meeting place of the solar logos and the regenerative powers on the tip of the mound, and the human representation of that deity that arises from that mound. This is a very important concept for the Golden Dawn, as you will later see. Imagine that you are a Greek scholar being led from the exterior to the interior of an Egyptian temple to be initiated into the mysteries of life represented by the god of the sanctuary. The secret formula by which you can develop that God's potency within your own being is demonstrated by the route you take to approach the deity. Additional hints are conveyed through the incantations of the priests, their masks, the incense, the music, and the images that play before you. The experience of such an initiation can be so powerful that all of your life that follows it will align itself according to the pattern of correspondences that you experienced in the ceremony. Eventually, the altered pattern of your life yields forth the potency of the deity. The grade of Practicus, as the name of the Theoricus grade implies, you have been, up until now, largely able to deal with spiritual development in a theoretical way. Much of what you have done has been enacted on the level of the mind, learning theories and correspondences, observing the psyche, and achieving change in a somewhat passive way without much of a hint as to how to make conscious change in your daily life. The Practicus grade stirs your practical talents to awaken. Much of the attention will be drawn toward active application of the Hermetic principles that you have been learning. The student may begin to gain some perspective, suddenly knowing what to do with his newly acquired knowledge. He may begin to deliberately apply the principles in his interior map to his exterior life. The value of the liquid intelligence 202 Chapter 7 Hermetic Wisdom thirsts to be put to the test, and inevitably, this will cause some difficulty. Applying spiritual principles to mundane life can be very frustrating and is bound to lead to one failure after another. Repeated failure is a test of the student's true talent as a magician. As Israel Regardai commented, over the years I have been asked over and over again, what are the most important qualities that a student should possess in approaching the great work? Other than normal intelligence and emotional stability, I find two other qualities which are essential for success. They are best summed up in the following quotation: nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. 20. This grade shows forth the nature of suffering. As the student applies his knowledge toward the struggle for freedom, he is confronted with personal and universal traits that keep him from his goal. Everyone has blockages to work through. It is important to face the temporary pain involved in removing them. What is keeping you from quitting smoking or from obtaining the career that you really want? Is it something external? Are you sure? The belief that roadblocks to your desires are imposed upon you from the outside is probably not as strong now as it used to be. All real obstacles are within you. If they manifest themselves externally, then take note of them there and look for the linkages within that are producing them. Remove those incorrect beliefs. Reprogram yourself. Apply your dawning wisdom to make changes in your life. If you experience humiliating defeats and emotional pain in the process, then you are probably on the right track. Keep going until you are successful. Staying power is a most important virtue. If you are unable to push through resistance and you give in to idleness and distractions, you will suffer even more in the depths of your being, because progress up until now has likely set up a process that will not be denied. Perhaps I should apologize for baiting you into the practice of magic. You were warned that it is not what it appears to be. Suffering is, in a sense, needless, but it seems inevitable on the spiritual path. We cannot have the things that we want, at least not in the way that we want them. And we can't get away from the things that we are afraid of, at least not in the way that we plan. Trial and error teaches these lessons slowly. Eventually, if we are successful with the great work, we surrender and just live our lives, no longer governed by fear and desire. Fear and desire are ever present, but we learn to be honest and look them in the eye. Water, the grade of Practicus, corresponds to the sapphire hot and to the element of water. Water is often regarded as the element to imitate on the spiritual path. Learn to be like water. It flows around obstacles, knowing nothing of obstinacy. It moves with the utmost ease where the force of gravity directs it. To achieve its destiny, it stays low, undermining all powers of earth and fire that attempt to block it or lord over it. It follows the direction of worthy channels without destroying them, or instead, with terrifying relentlessness, it erodes away resistance. Water expresses little in regard to itself, showing only the patterns of wine that blow upon its surface. Likewise, the magician flows to wherever the force of divine will directs, expressing to others nothing of his own desires, but instead those of the divine breath that blows over him. If things get difficult in this grade, remember to submit to the gravity of spiritual power that draws and influences all things. Stay below others, holding them up and removing emphasis from yourself. You are much more powerful when you stay within yourself, as you are in your natural state, naked of pretense. Aspiring to great egotistical heights is natural for humans to do. It stems from the need to compete to survive. But you are on a spiritual path, which means survival is no longer persisting as a concern. What does it matter if you live or die? Trying to compete in the herd will cause you to build your tower based on illusions, like a cobra that flares its hood to look bigger than it actually is. Remember that the power of the divine descends from on high, not to meet us on some high battlement, but to permeate nature from beneath her beautiful blanket, bubbling up like a clear spring of light, wrapped in the simple garments of earth, air, water, and fire. The student of its mystery who stays the liquid intelligence 203-204 chapter 7 lowly, even as he develops his high gifts of intelligence, will bear witness to the knocked foundation of all things. As he builds himself up toward the heavens by using the abstract image of the tree of life, he should likewise remember the example of an actual tree and sink his roots deep into the nourishing depths of the earth. This tree of linked concepts extends by a mental abstraction beyond the physical world, allowing the mind to expand beyond its natural limits. The two different color scales of the tree of life, which you have built into your body so far, are two levels of such a structure. Just two more color scales and you will be ready to bridge heaven and earth. Self-observation becomes key here, as is usually the case. See yourself as the receptive vessel of divine influence. You may begin to notice the effects of the higher planes upon the lower, so use what you experience to achieve better and better contact with your higher self. Divination becomes especially important in this grade. Every detail of our existence is a manifestation of the directing power of the divine. That means that every detail is a potential sign or message alerting you to the path at hand. Know that you have no will of your own, independent of the divine will. It only appears that way to the unaware. Paradoxically, when you learn to surrender your personal will, you become independent, no longer needing to be guided by curriculums like this one. The great work involves surrendering illusory freedom for actual freedom. The magician is one who has abandoned himself and submitted to the divine. He has nothing to lose and nothing to gain, a truly fearsome power to reckon with. Purity is another important attribute of this grade, and as you may suspect, it has little to do with so-called moral purity. The nature of the four elements of creation may begin to clarify themselves for you. All of the elements are inherently free from the stain of evil. According to Kabbalah, they are supported from within by the power of the cherubim, the archangels who exist at the foot of the divine throne. It is only in the realms of Yetzirah and Ashaya, of the external interaction of these forces, that disharmony can exist. And it only follows that thoughts conditioned by disharmony can lead to perceptions of defilement, sin, and unhappiness. The knocked elements, untouched by fear, desire, and judgment, are inherently clean within themselves. They are the limbs of spirit, extending into the phenomenal world. Practicus curriculum, at a glance, to be completed in 6 to 18 months, daily Practicus formula. 1. The 4-7-8 breath, second chakra. 2. Ascent into the cube of space. 3. The lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. 4. The banishing ritual of the hexagram. 5. Invoking the 4 powers of water. 6. The middle pillar. 7. The Bhagyan Priya. 8. Practicus meditation. 9. Banishing the 4 powers of water. 10. The lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Other rituals pi format as directed. 1. Invoking and banishing the planet Mercury. 2. Invoking and banishing Jupiter. Additional exercises. 1. Daily tarot card or Celtic cross spread. 2. Hermetic exercises required reading. 1. The 4th knowledge lecture, from your textbook, Regardize the Golden Dawn, pages 69-76. 2. The Tree of Life as projected in a solid sphere, from your textbook, pages 594-621. 3. Man, the Grand Symbol of Mysteries, Essays in Occult Anatomy, by Manly P. Hall. 4. Kabbalistic Concepts, Living the Tree, by William G. Gray. 5. Tao Te Ching, by Lao Tzu. 6. Wheels of Life, A User's Guide to the Chakra System by Anodia Judith 7. The Tarot, History, Symbolism and Divination by Robert M. Place. Written assignments. 1. Outlining of Practicus Ritual. 2. Diary assignments, including tracking of planet Mercury, the Liquid Intelligence 205-206 Chapter 7 projects. 1. Enochian Tablet of Water. 2. The Tree of Life in Bria. 3. Drawing of the 7 palaces attributed to the Sephiroth. 4. Drawing of Tetragrammaton Upanthi tree. 5. Drawing of names and sigils of the Olympic planetary spirits. 6. Chart of the geomantic talismanic figures. 7. Drawing of Garden of Eden before it fall. 8. Drawing of the symbol of Mercury on the Tree of Life. 9. Drawing of cube of the stylists. 10. Greek cross of 13 squares optional implements. 1. The water chalice.
world we live in, doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, psychiatrists destroy minds, scientists destroy truth, major media destroys information, religions destroy spirituality, and governments destroy freedom. Do governments lie? Governments are made of politicians, are they not? How do you know when a politician's lying? He opens his mouth. When he opens his mouth, yeah? And mostly they comprise of lawyers, don't they? They're known to be liars. Liars and lawyers. Doctors lie. Well, yeah, they lie. You go to the doctor if you've got cancer, and you're going there because you want to be cured. Don't you? But what does he give you in exchange for a cure? A cancer treatment. So they're liars, because they teach that cancer can't be cured. That's a lie, because there's thousands of cures for cancer. And the ones that find those cures that are natural, the likes of Jim Humble with his MMS solution, the 12 inorganic mineral cell salts, which I will be sharing with you today. Minerals, yes, minerals, cures. Minerals are cures for everything. And but of course they deny this, and they insist that there is treatments for you for everything. The churches lie. You know that priests lie? They're just carrying out a business. They have to lie. If they told the truth, there wouldn't be a priestcraft. And how do I know they lie? Well, it's easy. You go down to the local church, you go in there and you meet the priest and you say, hey, the church over the road, the different one, but Christian, like yours, would they be telling the truth to their people? And he'll tell you clearly, but they don't. And then you go over the road, and that priest tells you that the priest over the road is a liar and going to the devil. So that's how I know the lies. You just ask them. And then if you should happen to ask them, what about the other 29,998? Because there's 30,000 registered Christian denominations in the world, depending on which authority you consult, but I've seen 30,000 many times, registered Christian denominations. And they're all telling you that the other ones are liars, you see. So that's why it's hard to get the truth. So today we're going to be dealing with some real deep truths. And I'm talking profound truths. We're going to be going into the subject, as I said, the mineral salts, and I'm going to be basing most of what I'm doing today out of this book. George W. Carey and Inez Eudora Perry, that's for the camera, Zodiac, and the Salts of Salvation. And I'm going to be reading extensively from this book, because there's some gems in here, the like of which are very, very unusual and uncommon in this world. The human body is made of 12 systems. And those systems are the skeletal system, the muscular system, the nervous system, cardiovascular system, digestive system, endocrine system, excretory, immune, dermal, lymphatic, reproductive, respiratory. There are 12 cranial nerves. In your solar plexus, which is the largest of the plexuses, there are 12 nerve endings. The body is a whole system of 12. What I'm going to show you today is we're going to be talking about this marvellous temple. It's a marvellous temple. An alchemical laboratory. And if you keep that temple clean and pure, with good habits, you can restore your temple to perfect health. It is the temple, in the Bible it's called the temple of God. The scripture in the Bible says, "What, do you not know that your body is the temple of the living God?" And it's otherwise known as Solomon's temple, the soul of man. That's the temple of Solomon. In Solomon's temple, Josephus, the first century writer, informs us in his chapter 3 of the third book of Antiquities of the Jews about the temple of Solomon. And he says, and when he ordered 12 loaves to be set on a table, he denoted the year as distinguished into many months. And for the 12 stones, whether we understand them, the months, whether we understand by them the months, or whether we understand the like numbers of the signs of that circle which the Greeks called the zodiac. Josephus. All the churchgoers, Josephus said this and Josephus said that. They might want to think about that one that Josephus said. Philo, these are all his works. He was a very prolific writer in the first century. This man's life footprint was over the footprint of the supposed historical Jesus Christ, and yet there's no mention of Jesus Christ. He was a Jew, probably one of the richest men in the world, who lived in Alexandria. Pretty much the most powerful family in the world, this family. And he wrote about the allegory in the Bible. There's 3 books in here devoted to the allegory in the Bible, etc. And this is what he had to say about the 12. Then rest, which are not like one another in colour, and which are divided into 4 rows of 3 stones in each. What else can they be emblems of, except of the circle of the zodiac? That's the breastplate of the Jewish high priest. He would wear around his neck like a necklace or whatever, or well, it might have been attached to his robe, but it had 12 precious stones, sapphire, jasper, etc. Right?
All the first one.
Now this is Philo telling us it's the zodiac. For that also is divided into 4 parts, each constituting of 3 animals, by which divisions it makes up the seasons of the year, spring, summer, autumn and winter, distinguishing the 4 changes, the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes, each of which has its limit of 3 signs of the zodiac, by the revolutions of the sun according to that unchangeable and most lasting and really divine ratio which exists in numbers, etc., etc. I brought 2 books along of ancient days connected with Jewish history for the very reason of showing that it is one and the same with the zodiac. Because if I had brought a million other books from so-called pagans, then churchgoers would write it off. But the Jews themselves admit to this. So we have 12 everywhere. In Revelation, Jesus talks about the 12 pillars in the temple of my God. He has 12 disciples. There are 12 trees along the river that give healing to the nations. It's 12 everything, because it's your body. Your 12 systems. The skeletal, the muscular, etc. That's what it's talking about. And Sol, as I will show you, is related to the salts, the minerals that I'm going to be talking about. Because salvation comes from this, you see. From salt. You get many words that come from that, like salute, which means health, greeting, salutation. In Italian, salute. Salute means health. Saluti means greetings. Same in French, salut. Salud in Spanish. And also in Greek, the word is halos. Halos, from which you get halo. You see, when you have salvation, you have a halo. Salt. The sun, known as Sol. The French for salt say sel. The self. This is why you call yourself myself. Yourself, your soul, your salt. Because your body is a pillar of salt, of the minerals, the 12 minerals that are the building blocks of your body. So that's what we're going to do. Would you like to do that? That'll be nice. Okay, so to kick off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a graph on the board based on science. This sine wave here is quite known to people who love their geography. That's the globe of the Earth there, and there's the equator running through the centre. And this sine goes up 23.5 degrees north in declination, or in latitude, I should say, to the equator and hits the Tropic of Cancer. What's the Tropic of Cancer? Well, when the sun... See, this is the sun's path, the ecliptic. The sun goes through a 360-degree circle, divided into 12 slots of 30 degrees. So when the sun hits there, the sun is in the sign of Cancer. That's the Tropic of Cancer. It's where the sun is. So the sun is in Cancer, it's hit the Tropic of Cancer. From there, it's got nowhere to go but to fall down and go to the Tropic of Capricorn. And it does this year in, year out. You get summer, winter. Or 4 seasons. Or 12 seasons. Or 2 seasons. A hot one and a cold one. Take your pick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that. Okay? And this map is an old map, and it shows the glyphs of the signs. Aries is there. Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, etc., etc. So let's do that, shall we? Ah, yes. There's the Earth, the equator, Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn. Okay? So we need to shrink the sine wave a little bit. So we start here at Aries. Everything begins in Aries. This sine wave is going through your body, straight through your body. Aries is the top of the head, and the 2 fish of Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac, are your feet. So, as I said, that's Cancer, and that's the Tropic of Cancer, and that's the Tropic of Capricorn. And so when the sun hits that, in the northern hemisphere, you've got the longest day of the year, and that's the shortest day of the year. And these 2 days are equal, the equinoxes. So you've got sort of the middle seasons. You've got hot and cold, but here is the middle, the equal, equinox. Everything's equal. And that's March the 21st, June the 21st, September 21st, December 21st. Now, this is science. That's the sun's path in the ecliptic, and as it goes through, there are 12 divisions of the sky. These are the 6 summer divisions: Aries, Taurus, Gemini. That's the spring. Cancer, Leo, Virgo. That's summer. And that's good. That's great. Photosynthesis. You get to eat. Winter, ooh. Things start turning nasty at Libra. The scales. Libra sits on the scale right there. 21st of September. Judges the sun as it goes through down into winter. At that point of equilibrium. And from there, it's all downhill for the sun. That's why they call this the fall. The sun is falling. Falls through Scorpio with a stinger, bites the sun. The sun shrinks. Its beautiful rays from Leo, where he rules, in astrology, the sun rules only one sign, Leo. And it corresponds with your heart. That's why you always hear Leo, the lion heart. Or in The Godfather, the family Corleone. Corleone. The Corleones, yeah?
Heart, lion.
Heart of the lion. It's always the heart of the lion, heart of the lion, heart of the lion. And those rays of the sun, they get so diminished that by the time they get down into November, October, November, the sting of the scorpion, you know it's the fall. Sagittarius with his arrow is also there to inflict more pain on the sun. And the last day of Sagittarius is the 21st of December. And that's the shortest day of the year. Yeah. No, that's just in the Northern Hemisphere. I always say that at the start of this. Please take note. Yes, it's opposite here, but the science comes from above, as you will see. That's the position of it. It's got its polarity. You can never reverse it. And I've explained this in my video. There's a presentation out there anyway on astrology that I've done. I forget which one it is. But I've done that in detail. Capricorn, Aquarius, and fish Pisces. Now, the human body is here, the head is here, and the feet are here. How do I know that? Because I pay attention. All you've got to do, don't worry if you're not a genius, I ain't, just pay attention. This is an ancient depiction of the human body. There it is, Aries, the head, the brain, the cerebrum, Taurus, the cerebellum, the lower brain, the one that sits back here. And we're going to study a lot about the two brains today and the cell salts that correspond with it. It's very important for your mental balance and so you don't get depression. It's unfortunate when children go to doctors that give treatments and they're depressed, they've got no idea about the salts. And they put them on medication for depression. They end up committing suicide. Many people, probably 99.9% of people commit suicide because of the depressants that doctors would tell lies give them. We're participating in the killing machine of Big Pharma. And they're enjoying it because they've got lots of money in the back pocket. It's all about cash. I love it. So, let me see. Oh, whoops. What have we got here? That'd be the Last Supper of Leonardo da Vinci, would it? Yeah. Well, he knew his science. He knew that that would be the Son, Jesus Christ, at this point here. You see, and he has 6 signs to his right and 6 to his left. Everything starts in Aries. That disciple has got his hands at the head of the table, showing that he is the head. I am Aries. All you guys sit behind the table, I sit at the head, because I am the head of the table. There's Taurus, ruled by Venus. This disciple looks markedly feminine, because the sign of Taurus is the first sign of femininity. Venus rules there, and the moon exalts in Venus, in Taurus. It's all feminine. Cancer, the crab, he's got a knife in his hand pointing backward, because that's the scaly, that's the crab's features, and he's pointing to the neck of Virgo and the absence of the Adam's apple, indicating that that is the only woman, or the woman in the zodiac. Leo, of course, he's got his elbow on the table because Leo rules the zodiac. That's where the sun rules, you see. He's the boss. So he can put his elbow on the table. Virgo, markedly a woman. To the left of Jesus is Libra, the scales. That's why this disciple is showing the scales. Gemini over here, he's got his hands up. Now why would he be doing that? Well, because Gemini rules the twins, Pollux and Castor. See, Leonardo da Vinci knew what he was doing. And he gave us the signs. Notice that they are grouped in threes. Summer, spring, summer, autumn and winter. There's Scorpio hiding behind Libra, the next disciple, showing scorpion features. Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. There's many, many other things that I can point out here, but I've done it in other presentations, so I'll leave that. But the points that we want to focus on always with astrology is the cardinal points. They are the gates of heaven. The Neoplatonists taught that souls come in and leave from those gates. This is the gateway of men. This is the gateway of the gods. These signs are very, very powerful, the cardinal signs. I'm going to focus quite a bit on those today, because the creation happens here in the cerebrum, and as I said, in embryology, I didn't say that, I was saying that before we started the camera rolling. I was talking about this. In embryology, the first of the systems developed is the cerebrospinal system. Aries rules the cerebrum. Remember, it's the top. The cerebrum. This is the cerebellum. That's Taurus. Taurus rules the bottom half and the neck. And then Gemini rules the hands, remember, as Leonardo da Vinci indicated. And down it goes. Scorpio is here in the sacrum. This is like a big stone. This is 5 fused vertebrae. The sacrum. And below that's the coccyx. That's otherwise known as the cauda equina, the horse's tail, because Sagittarius rules this part here, the hips, and this part of the body. So it's the horse's tail. And then there's the lumbar. Well, that's hard, isn't it? Okay, let's have a look at this, shall we? Here are the
cranial nerves. In the cerebrum proceeds a fluid, and it descends, and it makes all the rest of the body, the corpuscles of the body. Because this is the number one gland, the first gland developed in the body. And as that fluid descends, it gets differentiated at the pineal gland and the pituitary gland into a magnetic and electric fluid. It then gets differentiated at the other glands, and the other glands do their making. So this beautiful oil proceeds and descends. It falls. It falls from the... This is the heavens. Here, this rock here, at the sacrum, this is hell. This is where generation happens. The bottom chakras. Sodom and Gomorrah. And Egypt. Egypt is down here. This is called Egypt. Below the kidneys. This is the Midgard, the midpoint. From here one can proceed upward toward the heavens. And you'll understand exactly why these are the heavens. There's the optic thalamus, the eye that sees. When eventually the oil returns and ascends, that's what the ascension means. It anoints that, the optic thalamus, and then activates the pineal gland, and all the dormant brain cells are reactivated. And that is exactly what you see with these people here. They have their pineals activated. Oh, what's that? A halo. Remember the word halos means salt in Greek? Hello, greeting, salutation. That's why we say hello. Or salut in French. Salt. It's all about salt. The science of salvation, the elixir of life, is hiding in the scriptures. What this wonderful book is about is that biochemistry. It's all about biochemistry and how to keep your temple clean and pure and chaste. So that the oil that was produced in heaven, the manna that comes from heaven, our Father, give us our daily bread. It's also called bread. It's called the seed, the fish, because that oil smells like fish. It's called soma, the soma juice from heaven, etc., etc. So as it... I'll fix this. Ah, yeah, that might be a good idea, actually. Yeah, thanks, mate. Beautiful. So as it ascends, and it can only ascend if the condition down here is healthy and clean. If the body is chemically balanced, that oil will ascend. You see, this is why it's very, very necessary to be careful with certain ones promising ascension and talking about ascension. I mean, in the churches, they think they're going to meet Jesus in the heavens. It's a rapture. That's how they're going to ascend, because everybody's looking for that immortality. That's what the elixir of life's all about. But they've taken it literally and they really believe that they're going to meet Jesus in the heavens,